Our outcomes for the second part of Unit 2 include, well, in class we discussed discovering Europe during the medieval ages. And as always, during the class period and during today's lecture, we will define our IDs that are found on our syllabus and course calendar. So today we're going to assess main motives for European travels. Why did Europeans decide to go west across the Atlantic, which is insane? Why would anyone in their right minds go into the complete unknown without GPS systems, without steel-hulled motorized ships, without really refined navigational technologies, and go into the unknown where they might very well die? So there are some really big motives for these Europeans to travel west into the unknown abyss. We're going to define the Columbian exchange. Once Europeans reached the Western Hemisphere, reached America, they thought it was Asia, of course, but when they reached America, it initiated something that was labeled the Columbian exchange, named after Columbus, who was the first European explorer to reach the Americas. And we are going to talk about the big positive and negative effects of the Columbian exchange on the Eastern and Western hemispheres, on the Americas and on Europe and Asia and Africa in particular. Lastly, we will analyze how Cortez, a Spanish conquistador, a conqueror, took over the Aztec Empire of 25 million people with basically a handful of men. Quick review. We have the Crusades and Inquisition in the in the western part of Europe. The Crusades from the 1100s to 1250s-ish, and the Inquisition that started around the mid-1400s, the mid-15th century, and lasted quite some time. And the Inquisition and Crusades were both attempts to get rid of others meaning Muslims and Jews and Christians who weren't following Christianity according to the said doctrine of those in power, in particular the Spanish, and to expand Christianity, to spread their version of Christianity into other parts of the world. And these Crusades and the Inquisition provided exposure to Eastern goods. Eastern as in Asian goods, Chinese porcelain and silk and spices from India, and all of these amazing Eastern goods became very, very valuable for Europeans in general. The Renaissance then happened starting around the 1430s till the 1550s-ish, and the Renaissance literally means rebirth, and it was a rebirth of ancient Greek culture, which for a millennia had been suppressed because Greeks were polytheistic pagans. They believed in many gods, and of course when Christianity comes into power in the 400s, they get rid of anything that had to do with more than one god, more than the correct Christian God. So Greek culture was completely suppressed for 1,000+ years. So now there's a renaissance with Greek culture, Greek art, and beautiful, beautiful art and creation that is mixed with science and people wanting to explore. And of course, there's great competition in Europe in particular. And the Renaissance of Europe was really an amazing, phenomenal explosion of art and science. And then 1453. These are all things that are happening before the European voyages of exploration. 1453 is a really big year. You should know this year for sure. And this is the year that the Ottoman Empire, with the leader Mehmed II, Mehmed the Conqueror, he took Constantinople and changed it into Istanbul. And this had great repercussions and ramifications because he blocked trade routes from the east to the west. And of course, those trade routes blocked were blocking the goods from the east, including all the Asian deliciousness. Okay, so there's Constantinople right up here, and you can see how Europeans wanting goods from China and India down here, that really blocks the trade routes. And going up above is possible, but again, the Islamic Empire had a lot of the good trade routes the Silk Roads, and the farther north you go, the more challenging it is in regard to weather, and there are deserts here that are crazy hard to cross, but the farther north you go, the colder it is, and cold is definitely a humongous challenge. Okay, so our question to think about is, what were motives, the main reasons for European voyages of exploration and travels? Why? Why did Europeans voyage and explore? So the reasons for Iberian expansion, Iberian means Spanish and Portuguese. Right down here you can see the Iberian Peninsula. This includes Spain and Portugal. And so the first reason is the location and experience. If you can see, they are located on both sides water. This is the Atlantic Ocean on their west, and in the east is the Mediterranean Sea. So they definitely have experience sailing in both waters, including Atlantic Ocean waters. And there are lots of sailors that come from these two regions. And they have the means. They have extraordinary wealth. They are very successful for quite some time and manage to gain a ton of money compared to other parts of Europe and other parts of the world. And they do have access to technologies that are developing. They start in other parts of the world, Eastern technologies in particular, Chinese, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But these technologies are navigational and allow Spanish and Portuguese sailors the opportunity to sail in places where they couldn't prior. So the Chinese compass determines direction, north, south, east, and west, and it's based on a pull from the poles, or north and south poles, and it pulls and shows the direction of north, and when you know where north is, you know where the other directions are. Very, very important when you're in the middle of the ocean and have no idea where land is and where anything is, because there's nothing in any direction. And then the Greek astrolabe, it determines latitude, and this shows how high you are in the scale of the world, and it's measured based on stars, the position of the stars. Really, really important when you're in the middle of the water and you don't have GPS technologies like we have today. Additionally, we have the caravel, which is a mix of lateen, which is a triangular sail, and square sails. So here you can see a triangular sail, and this allows for faster speed and greater maneuverability if you mix both the Indian lateen and square sails, the old school square sails. Columbus's ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, were all caravels with mixed sails. Okay, and here's our big question. Why? What were the motives for Spanish and Portuguese voyages across the Atlantic Ocean? Well, one, land hunger. After the plague hits in the mid-1300s, the population of Europe is very, very sad, and eventually populations recover from the plague and they start repopulating, and people have sons, and when you have more than one son, who's going to take over your land? It is passed down generationally. So if you have two sons, the second son either isn't going to get any land, or he's not going to get enough to sustain himself and his family. So there's land hunger, a desire to move on to find bigger places for families to grow. There's also competition and this philosophy of mercantilism mixed with the idea of might equals right. If I am stronger than you, then it is correct that I have the ability to take over your property or your things. Might is literally physical in this case, might equals right. And then mercantilism is this idea that there's a pie, and the world is a pie, and it is broken up into pieces, and everyone wants the biggest piece of that pie. And the philosophy behind mercantilism is that there's a limited amount of that pie. In reality, of course, the world sustains way more than enough than all humans today need, and at the time the population was many billions smaller than the population is today. Another motive is guts, glory, and titles. If you were going into the Atlantic Ocean, the unknown. It showed that you had tremendous amount of guts. And if you did come back alive, you would be seen as a hero. So it's people who are really, really ballsy and feel that they want to prove something to the world who sail. And when you come back, if you come back, then you end up with a phenomenal level of glory. And in general, the people who led these cruise ships, these ships into the unknown, received titles, Admiral of the Ocean Sea. And if they conquered territory, then they would become a Vice Admiral of whatever territory it was that they conquered. And the titles were something that were really important. It's like someone calling themselves or gaining the title of doctor or sir in England. And so the guts, glory, and titles were very, very important for certain people. And then God, the desire to spread Christianity. Proselytization was a humongous and still is a really big part of Christianity, which is part of what makes it a universalizing religion. It has people who believe that it is their duty to spread the good word to other people, to save other people by spreading and teaching Christianity. And so, along with the conquerors, the conquistadores, who end up going from Spain and Portugal to the West to conquer and get their titles and all those things that they want, they also have friars and religious leaders who go with them to help convert the people. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, gold and goods, namely Asian goods. Of course, people in Spain and Portugal and Europe in general don't realize that there's an entire world that exists between Europe and Asia if they were to sail to the West, and that is North and South America, of course. So they thought that they were going to sail west and hit China or India, and they wanted all of those good Asian deliciousness, the silks, the spices, the porcelain, the jade, etc. These are pictures of some of the porcelain and silk and spices that were found and continue to be found. And people in Europe really appreciated these items. Spices for their qualities, their health qualities, their seasoning qualities, and the ability to preserve meats and foodstuffs so that they can be carried for farther and will last longer. That's very nice because we don't have refrigerators or freezers at the time, of course. And silk is very, very lightweight, but very, very luxurious. It's beautiful, it's wonderful to touch. I personally hate the smell, but it's really quite beautiful. And porcelain is special because it is very, very thin and very strong. I'm not going to say that you can drop porcelain and it won't break, but it's much more durable than ceramic, and it's much lighter and thinner than ceramic. Okay, moving on to actual voyagers. We have this Portuguese sailor, Bartolomeu Diaz, and he traveled starting in 1488 of the Common Era, and he died in 1500, and he started from Portugal up here, and he went all the way down Africa and landed in the Cape of Good Hope. This was an extreme feat and very, very impressive, and he came back and became a real hero for Europeans and especially for Portugal. Another Portuguese sailor, Vasco da Gama, who traveled around the late 1400s, 1497 till 99, he did something that was unprecedented. He went all the way from Portugal around Africa, including into these straits, which are extremely harsh waters if you go through them during the wrong time of the year. Lots of boats have sunk in this area. And he manages to make it all the way to India. And this is really important because now Portugal has control over pretty much the entire territory around Africa in the waters. And they end up setting up posts, trading posts that give them control as far as European powers go to trade with Africa and with India around the territory. And then we have Spanish reasons for going west. Well, the Portuguese create trading posts in the Indian Ocean. You can see a lot of the trading posts, they're dots on this map. And Italy has taken over the Mediterranean Sea. And the Ottomans control the land routes from the Middle East, going east and west. Constantinople is right here where the arrow is. And therefore, the Spanish decide to go west. The Spanish also have great power. In particular, they just finalized what is called the Reconquista, and this took place over 780 years. And Christian Spain finally won in 1492 over the Muslim Moors, who had taken over parts of Spain, and they took Spain back from the Muslims. And this was a phenomenal feat, and they were very, very, very proud of themselves. The Reconquista, reconquering. Okay, and on the same year, in 1492, as the Reconquista was finalized, Christopher Columbus ended up going to the Spanish crown and asking them for some ships in an attempt to go west. Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon were married a few years prior and were wealthy and were feeling really good and powerful, especially right after the Reconquista. And they realized that the cost of sending a few ships with Columbus wouldn't be such a big deal. It was a great cost, of course, but similar to the cost of a big banquet, which they had many every year. So it wasn't such a huge investment. However, if Columbus were to be successful, it would put Spain in the top seat of powerhouse in the entire world. So they gave him the ships. And you can see on this map, it's a map that Columbus made, and it shows he thought that he was going to reach China, Cathay, and so this is his map of China, and of course underneath it is the real map of America, North and South America. So you can see how he realized that the world was round and he wasn't going to fall off of anything, but he thought that Asia was much, much closer than it is if they were to sail from Europe here, from Spain across. They weren't going to hit Asia, they were going to hit the Americas, which is what they did. They ended up hitting Haiti down here. Of course, Columbus never acknowledged that he was not in Asia, and that's part of the reason why Native Americans were called Indians for so long in our country. This is a Ptolemaic world map from the 15th century, and I think it's really interesting because it shows Europe, Africa, and Asia and the Indian Ocean, but of course it's missing the Americas because they didn't know that it existed. And this is a 15th century map. 15th century is 1400s. So here are our voyages of exploration. From here down are the Portuguese voyages of exploration, and the purple here is Columbus's voyages. In green here is Zheng He, the Chinese admiral who sailed all up in here in the Asian regions. And this is a picture of Columbus meeting the natives of modern-day Haiti. They were called Taino. And if you can see what's going on in this picture, the Taino are not dressed in formal attire. They're just, according to this picture, covered in loincloths. And they are gentle, and they don't have weapons, and they come bearing gifts. And instead, on the opposition, we have Columbus holding a big spear, and his men holding guns and swords. And these people in the foreground seem to be perhaps taken back. They're slightly leaning backwards maybe a little bit because they're not sure what's going on. Columbus, of course, is very strong and forward. And then in the background you can see native people running away. And it's unclear as to whether the image was drawn to show that the native people were finally understanding what was going on, or if it was just they were going back for other reasons. But it looks to me like they were running away. They finally were understanding what was going to happen when Columbus and his men arrived. No. The Taino people were not godless heathens, they weren't barbarians, they weren't um, uneducated. They were a beautiful culture, and this is some of their art. And these are called zemis, or semi, it's pronounced semi. And it's an image of a creator god or a spiritual ancestor. And it just shows that these people had a culture and had traditions that they upheld and were very an interesting group of people, peaceful in many ways, and focused on life and on sharing, and they were gentle people, especially when you compare them to Columbus, who considered himself and his men to be righteous and civilized, which the word civilized is interesting when you think about what Columbus did to these people. There are a couple videos here that I would love for you to click on. I will see if they work. Usually when I click on videos, YouTube decides that they are copyrighted and won't let me play them. So we will see what happens here. But otherwise, if you can't open them, please do so. Or if you can't see them on this video, please open them on the PowerPoint, which you can access on Blackboard. It is worth your time, to say the least. Okay, let's see. Keep in mind, this video is old and racist.
500 years ago, there were people on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, but neither knew about the other. On the western side, our side, the people had reddish-brown skins and lived in huts or wigwams. On the eastern side, in Europe, the people were white-skinned. They had learned how to build houses and large sailing ships, but they still didn't know much about the rest of the world. In fact, most of them believed the earth was flat. Then one day, a map maker named Christopher Columbus had an idea. Do you know what? I think the world isn't flat at all. I think it's round like a ball. Did you hear what he said? Did you hear what he said? He said that the world is round. Oh, he's crazy. I think the world isn't flat at all. I think it's round like a ball. The world is flat as the brim of your hat, and that is very plain. I know that I'm right, oh, I know that I'm right, when I say that the world is round. Oh, I'm right, oh, I'm right. My thinking is sound, and I'll prove the world's round. It won't take very long. But it did take long, 7 long years, before Columbus could convince a king or a queen to let him try out his idea. Then Queen Isabella of Spain agreed to supply the ships and men for his trip. I will discover a shortcut to India and bring back some of the great wealth I find there. And I can do it, for I know the world is round. And instead of going east to India, I shall sail west and reach India around the other way. It will be a shorter and cheaper way, for I'll do it all by sea. Queen Isabella provided Columbus with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And on August 3rd, 1492, they set sail across the unknown Atlantic. High on the foaming tide, over the ocean, onward our ships will ride, onward, my sailors. The ships sailed onward, but 2 long months after they started, there was still no sign of land ahead. Turn back, Columbus! Turn back, Columbus! We'll not turn back until we find India. Onward, men! By October 10th, the sailors and the crew were ready to take matters into their own hands. If Columbus won't do as we ask, we'll put him in chains. And we'll turn the ships around ourselves. Wait! Have you heard? One of our men has just seen a branch in the ocean. What of it? It had fresh berries on it. That means we're near land. Hooray! 2 days later, the ships reached land, and Columbus and his crew saw the people with reddish-brown skins who lived there. Oh, I think it is rather surprising that they should have reddish brown skins. But now since we have landed in India, then these people must be Indians.
We'll call this part of India San Salvador, and I take possession of it in the name of the King and Queen of Spain. The people Columbus called Indians were very friendly, and they gave Columbus and his men many gifts, but not the rich jewels and gold for which they had come. For Columbus really wasn't in India at all. He was on one of the islands off the coast of America. But because of Columbus's mistake, the natives of America have been called Indians ever since. Columbus visited other islands near San Salvador, looking for the great wealth of India. And then he and some of his men returned to Spain.
Hooray for Admiral Christopher Columbus!
Columbus had no trouble getting ships and men for his second voyage, but he still hadn't the slightest idea that he was headed for the vast continent of America, and that he would have had to cross it and sail over the Pacific Ocean before he could reach India by traveling west. The men of Europe were no longer afraid of the ocean. Columbus made 2 more voyages, and other explorers followed. But each year on October 12th, we celebrate Columbus Day, the anniversary of that day in 1492, when Columbus first sighted the land of the New World, America.
1960. Okay, so we just saw so many things that are historically entertaining, should we say. We have to have historical empathy when we watch a video like this because it wasn't meant to be racist and terrible at the time. Today, something like this probably would get a lot of shit from the media if it was produced. A few things to note. Nobody really thought that the world was round anymore by this time. By the time we had explorers sailing in 1492, people in general knew that the world was flat. Of course, there are some people who perhaps still considered it, knew that the world was round. Some people might have still thought that it was flat, but for the most part, everybody knew that it was round. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but when the guy talked about Columbus hitting land, he never even mentioned Haiti as the location of where Columbus hit, and that is perhaps because still today, and especially in 1960, Haiti is a black country, and I don't know if it was meant to be ignored on purpose or if it just kind of the producers didn't really think that it was important to mention, but I think that it's important to mention that it was omitted from this video. They never mentioned hitting Haiti. More video. This one is called Happy Indigenous Peoples Day, or it talks about the truth of what happens or what happened.
Quick, what does the word Taino mean to you? Taino, do you know? Most Americans are unfamiliar with the name of the Caribbean tribe that believed that their island was the earliest part of creation, and therefore the sun and the moon every day rose up out of a cave on its northernmost coast. On the other hand, most Americans know today is Columbus Day, at least in 47 states, although Hawaii has renamed it Discoverers Day after the original Polynesians who populated that island thousands of years ago. South Dakota calls it Native American Day, and Alaska just ignores it like they kind of do everything. But what we're really celebrating today is Taino Genocide Day, the day when Christopher Columbus began to wipe out an entire indigenous population in a way that would even make Pol Pot blush. In 1492, Columbus was on a manic hunt for gold when he set sail and eventually landed on a small island off the coast of North and South America, an island today named Hispaniola, which is split between the nations of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. As Columbus wrote in a letter to the King and Queen of Spain, "Gold is most excellent, gold constitutes treasure, and he who has it does all he wants in the world and can even lift souls up to paradise." But when he landed in what he called the New World, there wasn't much gold to be found. But he did find something he thought was just as good as gold: people, who, in Columbus's mind, would make great slaves. So he wrote to the Spanish monarchs, "They are well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword, and they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subject them all and make them do whatever we want. And here there are so many of these slaves. Although they are living things, they are as good as gold." What Columbus did to the island and the tragedy he brought to the native population there has been largely erased by time and replaced by a glorified story of a bold explorer who set out to change the planet. In reality, though, as a result of what we've learned from writings by Christopher Columbus's own men, he raped, pillaged, enslaved, and slaughtered people just to get rich. Not exactly the type of guy worthy of a Main Street parade. One of Columbus's crewmen, Miguel Queno, described the scene when Columbus first arrived in Hispaniola for the second time, and thousands of Tainos, or what were referred to as Indians, came out to greet the ships. Queno wrote, "When our caravels were to leave for Spain, we gathered 1,600 male and female persons of these Indians. For those who remained, we let it be known to the Spaniards in the vicinity that anyone who wanted to take some of them could do so to the amount desired, which was done." Queno went on to write that he took his own sex slave, a beautiful teenage girl who, in his words, quote, "resisted with all her strength," quote, end quote, leaving him no other choice but to, quote, "thrash her mercilessly and rape her," end quote. And when Columbus's men did good work, Columbus routinely presented them with their very own sex slaves. But that was just the beginning. Columbus eventually started up a global child sex slave trade, exporting Indians all around the world. As he bragged to a friend in a letter written in 1500, 100 castellanos, as a Spanish coin, are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm. And it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 years old are now in demand. Eventually, under Columbus's orders, life for the Taino on their homeland of Hispaniola became so bad that they resorted to mass suicide. As the Spanish missionary Pedro Cordoba noted in 1517, 25 years after Columbus arrived, as a result of the sufferings and hard labor they endured, the Indians choose and have chosen suicide. Occasionally, 100 have committed mass suicide. The women, exhausted by labor, have shunned conception and childbirth. Many, when pregnant, have taken something to abort and have aborted. Others, after delivery, have killed their children with their own hands so as not to leave them in such oppressive slavery. By the time Cordoba wrote those words, the indigenous population on Hispaniola had plummeted from roughly 3 million people before Columbus arrived to only 12,000 25 years later. A few decades after that, not one Taino was left on the island. An entire culture and people completely wiped off the map and largely forgotten, thanks to Christopher Columbus. Happy Taino Genocide Day.
Okay. Oops. Here we go. Let's close this. So, that was fun, huh? Okay. So in Haiti, of course, there was the desire for gold, and they created cotton plantations and needed slaves to work on those plantations because in general, European men don't like to get their fingernails dirty, and so they had to use slaves. When the Taino people resisted, there were problems. There were extraordinary, horrible punishments for not meeting quotas. Occasionally, the Taino rebelled, but it's like a bunch of kindergartners trying to fight adults with guns. There's no way that the Taino could have won, especially with the Spanish military technology. Additionally, smallpox epidemics started around 1518, and smallpox is a disease that is common, or was common, in Europe, and Europeans had some sort of built-in immunities. When you get smallpox, you heal from it. If you are European, if you are from the Americas, your body has never been exposed to these diseases and have no antibodies. And so the Taino people and all Native people in the Americas had a really hard time dealing with smallpox, and most people died from it. And of course, when locals are dying from it, the Spaniards end up going farther inland to kidnap replacement workers to work on their plantations because they need their quotas to be met. And so Taino society, the people, completely disappeared, were completely decimated by the mid 1500s, by about 60 years after Columbus arrived. It's very, very sad. Here is where Haiti is, and this is where the Aztec Empire is. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. There was a Treaty of Tordesillas, Treaty de Tordesillas, which the Pope helped create, and it was a means of dividing territory in the New World, in the Western Hemisphere, between the Portuguese and the Spanish, because the Portuguese and Spanish are both Catholic and don't want to fight over territory. So the Pope helped them divide it. Of course, this takes zero consideration of the people who are already living in these lands in the Americas. It's kind of an interesting concept. And had they realized where the line was, I have a feeling it would have been pushed much farther west, because the Portuguese only got a little bit of land in the Americas compared to the Spanish. And here's an old map of it. Kind of interesting. You can see where they thought the boundary of the world was in South America. Okay, so we just talked about the main motives for European voyages of exploration, and now we're going to talk about some of the big positive and negative effects of what is called the Columbian exchange. Alfred Crosby is the person who coined this term, Columbian exchange, and he says it's the exchange of plants, animals, people, and diseases between the Old World and the New World. Some of the important things to see here from the New World, we have corn and tomatoes and potatoes, really huge sources for food that ended up going into Europe. Could you imagine Italian food without tomatoes? And potatoes helped sustain and rebuild the population of Europe in a tremendous way. Also, chocolate, cacao, cocoa beans, really, really important, because who doesn't like chocolate? And then another really, really big one is tobacco. Tobacco came from the Americas and went to Europe. From Europe into the Americas, really big, important things to note are, one, sugarcane, because sugarcane ended up growing on plantations that ended up needing slave labor. So that had a huge effect on people in the Americas and people brought into the Americas from Africa. Also livestock, cattle, sheep, pigs, and horses. There were none of those in the Americas. There were turkeys and llamas. Llamas are not easily controlled. You can't ride them for the most part. And so cattle are really important, and horses are really important for doing hard labor, carrying a plow, for example. And these are all really great sources of meat and protein and dairy, all really important food sources. So food sources in the Americas grew tremendously. Also grains, wheat, rice, barley, and oats. Prior to this, there was corn and potatoes, and now there were a lot more options. So of course, that's really important for the Americas. Another, maybe most important thing that came across from Europe was, or from Eurasia, was coffee beans. Coffee is really important. It's caffeine, and it helps people have energy. And when you have slaves working on plantations and you're not treating them properly and they're exhausted from hard labor, if you provide them with coffee, then they have more energy and can do more work for you. And lastly, as well, not quite lastly, but a really another huge, huge, huge influence on the Americas were the diseases brought over from Europe. Again, people in the Americas did not have any access to the microbes of smallpox and influenza and measles and diphtheria and whooping cough and measles and malaria. I think I already said some of those. These diseases ravaged the people in the Americas to a degree that we can't really understand. We're talking over 90% of the population dying within a couple years of exposure. That is a humongous reason that Europe was able to conquer the Americas so easily and so quickly, because of the diseases that just ravaged people, the people of the Americas, North and South America. And then lastly, what's not shown on this map are the people brought from Africa, stolen from Africa, and sent over to work on plantations in the Americas. Most slaves went to areas including Brazil and the Caribbean. Very small percentages came to North America, but still millions and millions of people. 12 million made it across. 20 million plus were stolen. Very, very horrific to think about. We'll talk more about that in a little while. So again, here's just another breakdown of what was brought over. And then something else to think about, from Europe to Africa, were guns, steel, and rum. Europeans did not go into Africa to steal slaves. They took slaves on the coast of Africa, on the west coast. And the slaves that were brought in from the interior were brought in controlled by kings and their representatives, who were provided with guns and steel swords and technologies and rum. So it was definitely a two-way streak here. Some pictures of the animals that came from Europe to the Americas, really important again for meat and for dairy and for working and for leather and bones for tools, etc. Here's an oxen pulling a plow. It's much easier to do work if you have someone else doing the burden. These are beasts of burden. And sheep for wool, and yeah. Could you imagine trying to traverse these mountains without someone carrying your food and supplies for you? That would be pretty insane. I do this type of stuff, but for fun, and I only carry some 40 pounds on my back. I don't carry a week's worth of stuff. Okay. So now our focus question: how was the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez, along with a few hundred men, able to conquer the Aztec Empire of 25 million? We will talk about this on our next video. Please watch it before next class.